Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Smalley. I'm the Assistant Director of Financial Aid Services at the Coordinating Board. And today I am doing a dedicated training to financial aid database and more specifically reconciliation. Each year we do an annual report we call it FADs if you're new. And it is one of the most critical reports that we collect at the Coordinating Board because it does generate a lot of data that is used for things like statistics, budgeting, legislative decisions. So it is by far the most critical report, in my opinion, because I'm in financial aid, but it's one of the biggest reports that we collect data for. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about what we're going to learn today. And so the main topic is reconciliation, but before we talk about how to reconcile, I thought it'd be useful to go through the FADs process just as an overview. And then we'll be talking about some of the reports that are generated when you submit a file, so we can talk through those. Then we will be going through step by step, what does reconciliation look like? What does that mean for you, especially this year because it's changed a little bit. And then lastly, what are your questions? So like I mentioned a moment ago, I have the Director of Financial Aid Services on. Her name is Deshae Reed, and she is going to be fielding questions as we go along. So if we get to a topic where you have a question that you feel would benefit the entire group by asking, if you type that in the chat box, then she's going to try and respond so that the entire group can see the answer to the question. Now, if it's a more specific question, it's only related to your school and it's somewhat complex, then we're asking that you hold those so that you can submit those through our normal contact process, which I'll be going through at the end of the presentation. But again, feel free to send those through. She's going to be going through those one by one. And then at the end, if there's any I need to circle back on, I can do that. All right, so let's get started with FADs. FADs is in full gear right now. We are currently in cycle 3, but if you've never done FADs before, or even if you're a seasoned person, I thought it would be helpful to go through some reminders. So first and foremost is the FAD Manual. The FAD Manual is posted on our Student Financial Aid Programs website, or webpage, I should say, and that's through the agency's website. So if you navigate to highered.texas.gov, the main agency page will pop up. And then at the top of the page, you'll notice that there's some tabs. The second one there says Institutional Resources and Programs. So if you navigate to that menu, Student Financial Aid Programs will be in the list. And once you select that, it will pop up a page. And one of those pages says Program Resources on it. When you click on Program Resources, which you can see here, and you scroll down on the page, towards the middle to the bottom of the page, there's Financial Aid Database Report. So this is where we keep our FAD manual. We also keep our FAD reconciliation form, which we'll be talking about later on in the training. But the FAD manual is kind of like the Bible for the FADs. It has everything you need to know about it. And so it's critical that you download a current copy of that because we do, as the months go by, as we identify programming changes or we get feedback from institutions, we do update that manual. So it's a good idea to always just check to make sure that the one you have is the most recent. And the way you can do that is when you pull up the manual, for example, on this copy on my screen, you'll notice it says revised September 28th of 20. So right when we opened FADs for cycle 3, we did make some modifications to the manual. So as you flip through the pages, we did identify where those changes are made. They're usually indicated either by a stop sign, an alert box, some kind of different colors. We do put modified, update, that type of thing throughout the manual so that we can help you drill in on what changed. And we also send out those changes through the announcement when we release the manual. But like I said, we did just release a new one for cycle 3. So if you have an older copy, either from prior cycles or even from prior years, you'll definitely want to discard those old copies. So once you get the manual, it is large. It is 58 pages full of content, full of resource materials, and just general information on how to navigate through FADs. So there's 5 sections within FADs, and each one is divided by a actual divider within the manual, so it's easier to kind of flip through, and you can tag those with tabs or however you want to do it if you print. So the first one is an overview, and the overview is like the deadline dates, how to create the file, what kind of format it's in. It also has a process flow, talks about the different types of notifications you'll receive. So it's just a nice walkthrough of what is FADs, what are you creating. So then once you get to the next section, which looks like this, it's called the file layout. The file layout is usually for the programmers or whoever's going to be pulling this information into the actual raw file. This has exactly how to set up the header on the file. It has all of the different character limits. And then most importantly, on the right-hand side, you'll notice that it has edits. So this is telling you when you create your file and you submit it to the coordinating board, here's what we're running your data against. Here are the items that will generate errors if they don't align correctly. So it took me a while to get used to reading this, but now that I'm more familiar, it makes troubleshooting a lot more clear. So that's what the file layout purpose is. So in addition to the file layout, we also have instructions. So the instructions do align with the layout, and it goes data element by data element, and it explains what each one is. So this is again used to identify, what is the coordinating board asking you to submit? And if you go to the instructions, it'll have that clarity there. And you'll notice on this page, for example, at the bottom, it has that modified with the pink color. That was an example of, like I said, something that changed. And then also that stop box at the top. So those are things that you'll want to look out for just notification wise. So the next thing is going to be the generated reports and notifications section. So we're going to be going through this in just a moment, but this helps you troubleshoot and make sure that the data you're submitting is as accurate as possible. And then lastly, and this is what it looks like, excuse me. And then lastly, we have an appendices. So we have multiple different sections within the appendices that help clarify things such as the annual loan amounts, the award amounts. We also have a section that discusses how to get access for FADs. So if you don't currently have the correct user access, we have an entire section in there that discusses that. If you're a private school, we have tuition differential information in the appendices. So again, each one of the sections within the manual serves a different purpose. And so if you've never read it from cover to cover, you will be surprised how much information we include, because every year we go in and we add more and more information to try and make it more useful. All right, so let's talk about what is the FADs process. I tried to break it down into some simple steps. So the first step is when you create the file. Once you get it done based on the layout that we talked about, you have to submit it to the coordinating board. So you're going to upload your file into MOVEit. MOVEit DMZ is what we call our kind of mailbox data exchange software, where you can not only send your file through, but you can also receive files through. So I like to, in my head, think of it as a mailbox. So once you upload your file into MOVEit DMZ, our program picks up that file and it runs it against all those different edits I mentioned. And once it goes through those, it's going to identify if there's any errors. So it will produce a variety of different errors, and that's not a bad thing. That just means that the data that you submitted doesn't quite align with either eligibility criteria, certain amounts, or maybe the file structure is just incorrect, and that's okay. That's the first step in getting through this process. So once you identify your errors, you have to resolve those, and we're going to be going through the reports to help you do that. Once you get through all the different student level errors that are identified through our program, that's when you have to do something called reconciliation. And this tends to be one of the more challenging pieces of the FADS process, and that's because we're trying to compare our system at the coordinating board to your system at the institution. And with as much money and as many students as we have, that is sometimes a difficult thing to do. But I'm going to be showing you the ways in which we're going to do that have changed this year and may make your life a little bit easier. So once you get through the reconciliation process and all of your totals are aligning with the coordinating board, then you go through a process to submit overrides. Overrides is something that is done at the very, very, very end. So these are the rare exceptions that you're going to go through that you can't resolve in any other way. Those are done through a manual process through the coordinating board. And then lastly, once you get all your overrides done, you get to certify. And so for cycle 3, certification is required, and certification means that that data is going to be used for future reporting purposes. Again, we get all sorts of requests and internal requests to use this data, and what we use is certified data. So again, going back to data integrity and why we're doing all this, this is how people make decisions and how they gauge how much funding is being utilized. This is how they determine in the session that's going to be coming up, what changes do they want to make? It's all driven by different reports, and FADS is one of the biggest reports. So lastly, all of those steps I just mentioned, we have a deadline looming, don't we? We have a deadline of December 11th, which is 1 month from tomorrow. But like I said, don't fear, because I'm going to be walking you through it, and we're going to get through it together so we can get it done on time. The reason that it's important to submit by the deadline is because other things rely on this data. Again, I just mentioned the legislative session. We also have allocations in early next year that we start pulling together. And because those things are relying on certified data, it's very critical that you submit your file and reconcile and get it done in time so that we have that from all institutions. Otherwise, it can sometimes slow down those processes. And it also can delay releasing money when it's time to do that. So again, 1 month from tomorrow is the deadline, but we are ready and waiting to help y'all get through the process. So let's talk about generated reports. A moment ago, I talked about when you upload the file and we run the process and it identifies errors, that you're going to get a certain set of reports that you're going to use to troubleshoot. So when you log into MOVEit DMZ and you access your account in your FADS output folder, you're going to notice a whole listing of reports. So the top 4 on my screenshot here identifies 4 different reports that we're going to talk about. So the first one, these are not in order, but the first one is the FAD 001 edit report. Within this report, there's actually 3 sections. There's an edit summary, an error report, and a warning and questionable values report. Okay, we're going to go through that in just a moment. You'll also receive a program comparison report, which we'll go through one-on-one. You'll get an unmatched Social Security number report, which is only done in cycle 3. And then lastly, you'll get your reconciliation report, which we'll focus on in just a moment. So one thing to note on when you submit a file is you're always going to get a new set of reports. And it's really important that you download each of those new reports, because as you change your file, it's going to change the values within these files. And you're going to want to take a look at it to make sure, again, that the information you've submitted makes sense for your institution. And I'll explain what that means a little bit more in just a second. So let's talk about the FAD 001 edit summary first. So that was part of that bigger overarching report that you're going to get. When you download it, included is something called an edit summary, and it goes element by element to give you exactly what you reported. And then on the right-hand side, you'll notice it says error values. So as you scroll down, you'll be able to identify how many errors for that particular item we've identified. And so that will help you work your file a little bit more strategically so that you don't necessarily have to go student by student. You can go kind of element by element, because if something is affected, for example, selective service, you have a whole bunch of errors for selective service. It may just be a programming issue on your end, or maybe even a character spacing is off. And so that's one way to work your file, is to look at the errors in this way to determine if there's an overarching issue that you need to resolve. At the bottom of the edit summary, there's an actual listing of all the different breakdown or buckets that you can look at. So it has everything from the total records that you have in your file. You can see that it has duplicated records, it has warning records, and then that last one in the list says the number of 0 EFC students. So again, all of this is more informative so that you know how to tackle your file to get it cleaned up and resolved. So also within the FAD 001, remember I mentioned there's three sections. So we went through one. The second section is the error report. So this is the actual student by student listing of all the data records. And within here, you're going to be able to see the student's name, their ID or social. You'll be able to see all the errors that were generated, what edit message it includes. And then on the far right-hand side, you'll be able to see the file value, which means that's what you submitted to us on, from your file and what it's being compared to. So this is, again, a little bit different than the summary in the sense that this is actual student by student. You can see what's going on with that student and see what needs to be corrected and then fixed in your file. And lastly, the last part of the FAD 001 report is the warning and questionable values. So similar to the error report, this one is just simply stating, hey, we noticed these few things and they seem a little bit off, but they're not so detrimental that we're going to create an error for it. But you do want to look at them because remember I was going back to data integrity and extracting data to create things like statistics or budgeting. Even though they're just questionable or things that are just warnings, if you have a ton of stuff that is flagged and it's wrong, we could be creating incorrect data on when we analyze that data. So it's always good to look just to see what is in your file, and this is a great report to look at that. So now moving on to that second report. That was called the Program Comparison Report. And this report compares one year to the next, but it's based on the cycle. So in this example here, you'll notice that there's a column that says 2019 and then a column for 2020. So both of these are cycle 3 data. So what you'll want to look at when you scroll through the program comparison report are things that are flagged review. And I pulled this example just because it was for sure the easiest to understand. For cycle 3 in 2019, there was 189 students listed living with their parent. Well, for cycle 3 this year, it went up to 323. So that was a 70% increase. That's a difference, I should say. So because of that difference, it got flagged because that's a pretty big jump. Now, that doesn't mean it's not accurate. You may have had some kind of shift, such as maybe COVID, or maybe you had a dorm closed down. There's a whole variety of reasons why something may have shifted, and it's up to you to do that research to make sure that there's nothing that is glaringly wrong. But this is just a quick way for you to do those comparisons to say, last year I reported this, and this year I've got a totally different number, and why is that happening? So that's kind of the idea behind the program comparison report. It's just informative. You don't have to do anything or resolve anything with it, but it will help you identify issues. And then lastly, I don't have a screenshot in here, but I mentioned a minute ago that there's an unmatched Social Security number report that is generated during cycle 3, and you'll need to look at it because the majority of the students in there, while they are warnings, that does indicate that they did not match your CB 001 report when you submitted that earlier in the year. So we do ask that you review those because we want to make sure that they align. Now you will get an error if they do not match the residency status, so those you will have to resolve before you can move on to reconciliation. And my favorite topic, reconciliation. That's where we're at right now. So far we've talked about you've submitted your file, you're working through these reports to identify all these student level errors, and you're chipping away at those until they're resolved. The only caveat is that if there's some students that cannot be resolved, there's an override process, which I mentioned is at the very, very end. So now that you've resolved all your student level errors, now you enter something called reconciliation. And reconciliation is comparing your numbers in your system to the numbers that we have at the coordinating board to make sure that they match. And the reason is because when you request money from the coordinating board, we issue that out and we track those numbers on our end. And then when you get the money on your end, sometimes that changes. Money shifts from student to student. Sometimes there's refunds that happen. And so this is just a way to close that gap and to make sure that everything aligns. Okay, so you may be wondering, well, I do reconciliation, but I never know where do the numbers come from. I get my report and I know exactly how much I have on my end, but where in the world are they coming from? So I thought it'd be helpful to go through that together. So the coordinating board totals are derived from different places. So for the grant programs, this last year we rolled out something called the Grant Payment Portal, and that's through CB Pass. You have to have an account to access that system, but the schools are asking for grant funding through that portal now. So the way that we pull the numbers for FADs is we look at anything that was requested by August 1st through that system, and that's what you're going to find in your FAD totals. So that's what we're aligning your file with, okay? Two programs that we call special programs that are done through a funds request form are educational aid and bilingual education scholarship. So anything that was requested by August 1st, we track on a ledger, and those totals are then loaded into our FAD system. So when you submit your file, that's what it's being compared to. So moving on to the right-hand side, we're talking about loans and our Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program. So for these three programs, BOT, CAL, and TASC, we're looking at funds dispersed during the program year as of August 31st. So when we pull that information from our higher education loan management system, you may have heard of it, it's called HELMS or HELMNet. That's where we're getting it from. So we pull those student details from there, and that's what gets loaded into FADs when we compare your file. Moving on to work study, Texas College Work Study is a little unique in the sense that we pay out work study in one lump sum. All the other programs that I've already talked about, you're requesting it little by little. You're asking for a certain number of students for a certain amount of funding or individually. But with work study, we issue out one big chunk of money at the beginning of the year. And so we don't have any indication of how much you've spent or for how many students. So what we do on our end is we automatically load one student and your total allocation. That's what we have for FADs as a starting point. If you make a refund to the coordinating board for work study, then that would be reflected. We'll adjust that on our end. But if you log in and you see that on your report and it says one student, you may be like, hey, wait a minute, I have more than one student, or maybe I don't have any students. That's just to clarify, that's what we do, just like I said, as a starting place. So you have one student and then your total allocation, and then we subtract any refunds that come through. And that's as of August 31st. Lastly, we have Work Study Student Mentorship Program. This is kind of a joint program that's shared between Financial Aid Services and College Readiness and Success. Vanessa Malo oversees that program, but because Financial Aid Services also collaborates on the process, I have that on here to make sure that you know how that one's done as well. So when Vanessa receives the financial reports that were due on September 5th, those amounts are loaded into the FAD system based on the report that you submitted. And as things are changed, she can go in and make those adjustments based on, again, this reconciliation process. So that's a look at kind of where did we get our numbers. That's a starting place. And then from there, that's when the fun begins. That's when we start digging into the numbers and y'all are looking at your file to figure out, do we need to change the coordinating board numbers? Or do we need to adjust our file or our system? Where is the discrepancy lying? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about, first and foremost, I'm going to be talking about the edit summary. So this is, again, something that I mentioned a minute ago as part of that FAD 001. This is the exact same screenshot we looked at a few minutes ago. But if you'll notice on the summary at the very bottom of the report, there's something that says total unreconciled programs. This is where you're going to want to start. You're going to go to this report and you're going to say, okay, I've got X amount of unreconciled programs. And in order to find out which ones those are, you're going to need to download your reconciliation report. So this is, again, just telling you how many we found. And then to find the detail behind that number, you're going to download that from MOVEit DMZ. And here is what it looks like. So when you download the report, again, this is a simplified version, but you're going to notice on the right-hand side that you have a listing of all your different programs and different columns. If something is flagged reconcile, those are the ones that showed up on your edit summary. And those are the ones that you have to correct or reconcile in order to certify your file. So in this example for Texas Grant, the first two columns indicate that the coordinating board has 2,971 students. That's how much we show that you asked to pay out. It also indicates that you asked for $16,182,373. So that's what we show. The file that got submitted shows that it has 2,940 students. So there's a roughly 30 student difference there. And then you'll notice that the amount is lower as well. So again, those items don't match. So now it's really digging in to figure out, where does that discrepancy lie? Again, we don't track student by student, so you have to, on your end, determine if your amount is correct, or maybe you forgot some students. We don't know. That's where the investigation comes through. Once you identify what needs to be corrected, either it's going to be that you need to fix your file and resubmit it because your file was wrong, or you need the coordinating board to adjust our numbers, either because our student count is wrong, or maybe the amount is wrong and you're going to be sending us money back. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and we're going to start with the grant program first. All right. So before you can make adjustments, and this goes for any of the programs, and I apologize I missed step 3, but your reconciliation form is going to align with your adjustments. So you'll notice on the page that this is a brand new reconciliation form. It looks very similar to prior years, but we made some enhancements to try and make it a little bit more intuitive and easier to fill out. And it's also condensed. It was previously, I believe, 4 pages, and now it's 2. So it should be a little more customer friendly now, and you can submit it to us more quickly. So each of the sections is on the first page. You have your grant payments section, which is here at the top. You have special programs, and then you have loan and scholarship programs. This form is available, I mentioned it at the beginning. If you go to where the manual is, it's directly below that. You'll also notice that within the form, there's different hyperlinks on how you can return money on here. So you've got the 3 hyperlinks at the top that you can click on within the form to access those. And those are also available on the same web page on the right-hand banner as you click through the different program types. Okay. So let's talk about, let's talk about the grant program first and how you're going to reconcile that, because it did change from previous years. So grant payments, like I mentioned, is done through CB Pass, through what we call the GPP or grant payment portal system. When you log in, you'll come up on the home screen and you'll want to update the appropriation year. and that's because you want to be looking at the 2020 year because it's automatically defaulting to 2021 now that we've started a new year. So make sure that you always update that appropriation year, otherwise you will not have the correct data to update. So the reason this is different is because this year you have the ability to increase or decrease your numbers for FADs using grant payments. If you want to increase your student count, you're going to click on the Request Funds tab. If you want to decrease your student count or the amount that you have within your file and return money, you're going to hit on the Return Funds tab. So let's take a look at increasing student count first. So increasing the student count, what I did is I navigated over to that tab, and when it pops up, again, you have your appropriation year set at 2020. Okay. Down at the very bottom, you have some instructions, and I highlighted one. It's a little hard to see here, but what it's indicating is that on this screen, for FADS purposes, you're only going to be able to adjust the student account, I keep saying account, student count up. You can't request additional money. This award year is closed, but this is the way that you can make that adjustment. So in order to do that, you need to enter a request amount of $0. Okay? Then you're going to enter the student count based on what you're trying to adjust it to. So you're putting in the difference, not the total. So for example, in my file, I had 100 students, but I really needed 5 more students to make it align. And so I'm going to put in 5 into the student count on here, and then that will adjust it on the coordinating board side. So if you're trying to increase your student count, you need to log into this screen and add the additional students here. Once we receive that request, it gets updated into the FAD system. Now, once you're done entering that in, you're going to hit Submit. And like I mentioned, be careful that you don't put the total students that you're trying to report in your file. You're only trying to align it with the coordinating board's total. So how many students do you need to increase it to get it to the correct number? Okay, so it's only the difference. If you need to adjust the number down, so you need to decrease it, you're going to go to the Return Funds screen. On here, same thing, you want to make sure that your appropriation year is correct, and if you need to fix it, you have to go back to the home screen. Once you get here at the very bottom, you have some instructions that talk about the ways to update the different sections. So again, there's a lot of different scenarios that could happen. You may need to increase your student count, but decrease your amount. You may need to decrease both your amount and student count. You may need to just decrease one. I mean, there's a whole variety of different things you could be doing. So in this example, I'm going to be returning some of my money. So I'm going to be returning $5,000. And then I have 2 students at my school because we award $2,500 as the target amount for Texas grant. So I have 2 students. And then I'm going to enter a comment here in this comments box, which is required. You won't be able to submit the form and you'll get an error if you try and submit it. So I entered my comment, and then I'm going to hit Submit Return. Okay. Again, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're returning money and you enter it on here, this substitutes that old return of funds form that we used to do for the grant programs. This is where you're submitting those numbers. But for FAD purposes, we will not be able to complete reconciliation until we've received your money. This form is just letting us know that you're preparing to send the funds to us. So you're telling us you're going to send $5,000, but until we physically get that either through a wire or a check, then we won't be able to proceed with reconciliation. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now that we've done some adjustments in grant payment system, we also need to do that form I just told you about and we walked through. So let's take a look at the form. So on this example, this is just a section of the form. I didn't put the whole thing because you wouldn't be able to see it very well. Once you pull up the form, you're going to go to the grant payment section and you're going to indicate which one it's for. So this one is for Texas grant. And I'm going to use the second example here where I am decreasing 2 students, decrease, and I'm also going to be reducing 5,000 decrease here. And so that tells the coordinating board exactly how to make sure that we reconcile for compliance purposes. So that's what this form is telling us, is that we are changing our numbers by decreasing what we have so that we can match what your file has. Okay, so that you have to submit the form and you have to go online and make those changes. And I didn't put this explanation. This explanation can be longer, but it should somewhat match what you put on your return of funds on grant payment system. Okay, so that's how you do a grant adjustment, either up if you need to increase your student count, or down if you need to reduce it or send money back. But again, make sure that if you're returning money, as I did in this example, you do have to do that extra step where you wire the money back or do an electronic funds transfer. Okay, so let's talk about loans and scholarships. This one is also very detailed on how you complete it. And so we are first going to identify if we have a discrepancy on our reconciliation report. And most schools, I'd say almost all of them, have a discrepancy. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to download your report out of MOVEit DMZ. And the fastest way to find that is going under the creator column and finding an actual name. It may or may not be this name, but we have our operations team uploads those spreadsheets manually, so you'll be able to find it pretty easily, and they were all done in September. So once you download the student loan details spreadsheet, it will pop up, and something new to be aware of this year is that we included an instruction tab, and that was to help people understand how to fill out each of the sections, because again, it can get a little confusing when you have multiple programs. Another thing we did at the bottom, and it's quite small, but you can see there's different tabs. So in prior years, we had all the programs on one big tab, and you had to scroll and scroll. This year, we broke it out onto individual tabs. So if you have multiple programs, you will need to toggle between the tabs. If you only have one of the programs, the other tabs will be there, but they'll be blank. Okay? So let's look at an example of Cal. We're going to look at that together, but here it is popped up. This is the individual one. We're going to go through a scenario together. So when it pops up and you have your student listings, those are going to be in the gray section under the blue heading that says for coordinating board use only. What you'll find when you open that is it's protected. You cannot modify or change this because this is just to let you know what we have in our system. We don't want you to modify that here. If you need to, as you go line by line and you're reconciling with your system and your file, if you find something that does not match, that's when you use the yellow section to the right to report those differences. If it matches, you don't need to put anything in there. This is only for the amounts that have a discrepancy. So here in my list, we have Daffy Duck. Under the gross amount, Daffy has $18,000, but in our system, we only gave him 14 because we're returning 4 of it. He actually went over his cost of attendance. He doesn't qualify for all that money, and we need to send that back once we reconciled it. So that's an example here of how you would update the spreadsheet. Everybody else in the gray was good. We don't need to touch them. That's the only thing, okay? But we also noticed that one of our students was missing. In our system, we had somebody else, but they didn't show up, and that happens for various reasons. So we wanted to include a place where you can manually add students that may not be in that list. So what you do is down at the bottom, you add each of the different elements in the columns. So Miss Minnie Mouse here, I added all of her information, and we paid out $5,500 for Minnie Mouse, and we didn't have any refunds associated with that amount. And that was because she received her money last summer because we're a header school. So because the coordinating board's system doesn't pick up student loan details that way, we go based on program year, which starts September 1st through August 31st of that program year. This student didn't get captured. So we want to add her manually. Okay, So now, as you can see, we've got Daffy Duck, who we need to return 4,000, and we're going to adjust our file down to 14,000, that amount. And then we have one student that was missing, and we need to add the 5,500. So when you get to the form, that reconciliation form, you do have to fill that out as well. Okay, so that's telling us for compliance purposes why you're making that change, so we can have that. So let's look at that for the same example. Like we did before on the grants, we're going to indicate which program it's for, which is Cal. We're going to indicate the student count that we're changing. So we just talked about Minnie Mouse was not on the list. So we're increasing our student count by 1 because all the other students were good. But Minnie Mouse had $5,500, but we also had a return of Daffy Duck for 4,000. So we have to do that math to come up with the net difference, which is $1,500 that we're increasing the amount by. So again, I tried to pick a somewhat complicated example, but if you start getting multiple students with all of this, it can get really, really tricky. So you have to go line by line, make sure you understand all the kind of credits and debits that you're going to be adding up, and then you put that on this form. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're submitting your form, you need to submit it for all the programs. Don't submit one form for grants and one for loans and one for the special programs such as work study. You want to submit them all at the same time. Otherwise, reconciliation can get a lot more complicated. Okay. All right, so we got through those programs. For any of the other ones, you do have to go through the return of funds form that are located online. For example, the Texas College Work Study, Educational Aid, Bilingual, all of those have dedicated forms that you fill out, and then you would need to do the section on the reconciliation form. I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but like I mentioned, we're recording this, so you can go back and listen to it again. Okay, so last piece here. Once you've gone through and you've reconciled each of the programs, you've looked at all your students and everything is finally good, you're going to get a notification via email saying that you're good to go, we got all your totals updated, and the last step is that you need to submit that file again to make sure that all the numbers we updated now match your file. And then when you pull your FAD 001 on that edit summary, it should say 0 unreconciled programs. That's how you know you're good. And you'll also, again, you'll get this email. But one thing that I mentioned earlier was after you've reconciled, there's still one more step, and that is overrides. So let's talk about overrides a little bit more. So when you're doing your FAD file, there's a data element number 9, and for every single student you're going to enter a code for them, and primarily students are going to have a code of 00, but every once in a while you're going to have a circumstance that requires that they have an override. And so you'll notice in here that it talks about the different exception codes. So there's 1 through 17. So we tried to think of any and everything that could happen to a student that may cause them to error out. And what you do is you can go in and add those exception codes to then process your file. But every once in a while, there's a student that just doesn't align with one of these. And so we've designated exception code 11 as that code. So if you include exception code number 11, that allows you to email the coordinating board that circumstance, and we can review it manually, and then we can clear that student. So the way this works is, again, you go through every single student. They will be assigned one of these codes. Most of the time it's going to be 00 because they don't have any issue. If they have one of these that is listed, you're going to use that code. If it's nowhere to be found, you enter 11 as your code, and then the next step is at the very end of the process. When you're almost done, you're going to send an email to fadb@highered.texas.gov, and you're going to include, to the right-hand side, there's a sample, and you're going to include the information within the body of the email explaining exactly why you need the override. We review that override and see if it's justified. If it is, then we manually override that for you, And then you'll be able to process your file one last time, and it will go through cleanly. And lastly, this is the best part, you get your validation and certification notification. So once everything is clear, you're going to be able to receive an email that says it's time to certify. I know I have validate at the top, but remember we're in cycle 3, so that's going to be certification. You'll log in and you'll click on the certification option on the left-hand side, and this box pops up. Once you fill in all your information and you hit submit, that officially means you are certified. So I went through a lot of information. I'm guessing y'all are asking questions, but if not, maybe you have some that you're thinking about. You may be wondering, well, my questions are way more complicated and I need some help. So how do I get in touch with you to get this help? So we have a couple options. First and foremost, we have a FAD and reconciliation email box, and that is that's manned by experts that know FADs inside and out. And the reason you want to send it there instead of an individual is because if someone's out of the office or they're tied to other projects, it will ensure that it's looked at by more than one person versus someone else who may not be available. So for sure, send your scenarios, any issues with submission to this mailbox, which is fadb@highered.texas.gov. Now, if you have general questions, so it's not related to FADs, we continually stress that you need to use the Contact Us link, and you'll select financial aid question as your contact reason. So those are things like you're locked out of your CB Pass account, maybe you have an eligibility question that just came up, and maybe you're working FADs and you don't feel like it's strictly related to FADs, you just need that clarification. You can send it through our general Contact Us. And lastly, our financial aid institutional phone line is back up and running. We do have staff members that can answer your calls. Keep in mind that 9 times out of 10 with FADs questions, because they're so specific to scenarios, you usually will need to submit those through the FAD box anyway, but definitely call and see if something that we can help you with, and then if not, we can provide you guidance from there. All right, we're at the end here. So again, my contact information, I always provide this at the end. So if you want to give me feedback or you have questions specific to this presentation, you can reach out. It's listed there. It's leah.smalley@highered.texas.gov. I also have a webcast survey. I use this every month to gauge topics, how I'm doing, were there issues with the recording, anything like that. So I really do read those. So if you can take a few minutes to complete a survey, that would be great. It's only a couple questions and it can be anonymous. You don't have to put your information. And then lastly, I just talked about Contact Us. We're really trying to drive home using that because we have our staff that we distribute out those questions so that they can be answered more timely. So if you can use that, that would be amazing. And lastly, I have my questions. I think that I'm going to exit out of here so that we can look at some of these questions together and see if we got about 9 minutes left. I knew that this would be a long webcast because of the amount of content I was covering, but let me circle back over here and see Deshay's answering. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so I can just look at the questions. Deshay, since you're answering questions, are there any that I need to address or are we good? There's always a lag because people are typing. No new questions. Well, excellent. Okay, well, over the course of the next few days, tomorrow is a holiday, but I will be getting this recording up on our website. We have a webcast page, archive page, that you'll be able to download a copy of this presentation. We'll also have a PDF available, but I hope that you found some new tips. If you're new to the process and you want some help, reach out. We're happy to set up a one-on-one training with your school to see if we can assist you. And again, I hope that you got some new useful information on FADs, and good luck over the course of the next month. We're almost to the home stretch, and I'm excited to see the results this year. because I know everyone's going to submit it on time, right? All right, well, thank you for joining. I hope you'll have a wonderful week, a great Veterans Day, and the holidays. So talk to you soon. Have a great day.